The next thing I want you to learn about, I've got my headphones on, is the printf function from the FUMT package. And we have been using print line. So before this said print line, right? You could go back and take a look at the video and see what that looked like. Is basically like print line. That'd be one way we could do it right there. And when we do that, it's going to print, Todd 40, right? But here we also have another thing. We have printf. And we can do %t, %t, name, age. What the heck? That looks kind of funny if you've never seen it before. This is called format printing, so printf. Before println was print line, just print a line. Here printf is format printing. And with formatting printing, we have to give it format verbs, right? We have to give it format printing verbs. And so there's different verbs we could choose from, and I'll show you those in a second. But we choose like, hey, this is what I want to have printed. And then we pass it an argument. So %t corresponds to fname. %t here corresponds to age. So we have our what we want printed with our format verbs in there, and then any variables that follow will be applied to the format verb. So the first format verb gets the first variable, the second format verb gets the second variable. And if we had like a mismatch, right? Like if we didn't have the same number of format verbs as we had variables, if I had like one more %t here or some other crazy stuff, %t, and if I ran that, it's gonna give me an error, right? And it says, hey, something's missing, right? %t, it's missing. Or if I had, and so we'll just do %t, and then we just want to use, format print line. I'm just wondering to avoid the unused error, and there we go. And so now it gave me a slightly different one, right? Like here, it's like saying, hey, you gave me an extra, you got string, and then like you gave me an extra variable there. So that's what this one is that's the error that we're getting from that one. Anyhow, so that's format printing and format verbs. And I want to show you that. I want to show you how it works because type is really important in Go. And this allows us to see the type. So the type of fname, the variable fname, right, is of type string, and the variable age is of type int. And so being able to see type can sometimes be helpful. It's also good to know about format printing and format verbs, but type is central to how we do things in Go. And so it's just useful. So let's take a look at how would we learn about, here's my first question for you. How would we learn about printf versus print line? Like, how do you go learn about that? And that's one of the things I want to teach you is how do you think about programming, and like when you have questions, how do you go find the answers? And so if I could teach you how to find the answers, that's everything. That's the whole game right there. So the answer you should have come up with is I need to go look at the documentation. And you could either go look at GOLANG.org, which is the official website for the GOLANG language, and that's where you'll find the documentation for the standard library. And since FUMT package is in the standard library, you can find it at GOLANG.org, or you could just go to godoc.org, and they also have documentation for the standard library. I'm at godoc.org. I added FUMT to the end of the URL here, and that brought up the FUMT package. And here I can scroll down, and actually, you know what, right there, I'm looking at all my formatting verbs. There are the verbs. But I'm going to scroll down and look at the index for the package. So here's the index. And in this index, I've got some of my printing functions right there. And there we have print line, and here we have printf. And so I could click on those and go read about them. So print line formats using the default formats for its operands, and writes to standard output, which would be the terminal, the screen. Spaces are always added between operands, so that's where the spaces are, right? And a new line is appended, right, which is why we have the new line. So the operands are the things that we pass in. It returns the number of bytes written and any write error encountered. So there's actually returns. And in this function, when we call this function, we'll actually have returns if we want to use those. And you see we haven't been using them. We've just been saying FUMT printf, right? But if I wanted to, I could use those returns and do something with them. And then the func print line, when we define the function, we say, hey, it takes these parameters, right? And so here it says it's taking an unlimited number of parameters of any type. So we'll understand that more, that notation, as we get further into the language. That's what that says. The main thing is, hey, it prints things, and we can pass in as many operands as we want. And then here's printf. Printf formats according to a format specifier and writes to standard output. It returns the number of bytes written and any write error encountered. So printf formats according to a format specifier and writes to standard out. And so here we have the format specifier, and it's of type string, and then we pass in, whatever operands we want, right? So let's go look at the print verbs and scroll all the way up to the top, and here are the printing verbs. And here's %t, right? And it's the Go syntax representation of the type of the value. And so when we use that, it's going to print out the type. So that's just an introduction to reading the docs. The docs can actually be really, challenging to read when you first get into the language, even if you've had experience programming. I know some very respectable programmers who said they couldn't even fully understand the language spec until they've been working with the language for 6 months. So the language spec is kind of written like, a very beautiful Japanese haiku, where it doesn't make a lot of sense, but you need to meditate on it, and over time there's a lot of clarity, and every word is chosen with great care and precision and can have a whole lot of meaning. And so we'll see that as we look into the language spec. So that's actually something I want to mention. We've seen godoc.org and golang.org, and I just said the language spec. So every language has a specification, and here's the language spec for the Go programming language. You just Google, right? You go to Google and say GOLANG spec, and it'll bring up the spec. And so this is one of the places that you look for understanding the language. And another place you could look is Effective Go. And so these are both part of golang.org, the official documentation, the official site of the Go language. But these are two places to turn to sort of start looking for answers. So one place, obviously, the standard library documentation, then also the language spec, and then also Effective Go. So let's just quickly take a look at the language spec and Effective Go. And for instance, one of the things we might look at there would be how do we name things in Go? And so I could do a Control F and look for a name, right? And I could come up here to the index, and I could see, is there anything about naming in there? I don't see anything. I might try identifier, right? And so identifier is often, used as a word for when we talk about naming. And so here we have identifiers. And this tells me how do I name variables, and they have to begin with a letter, is what that says. And then if I came over here and I looked for naming, right, and I get this, right, where it's names, how do I name stuff, and it says, hey, names in Go should be short, concise, evocative, and you don't use underscores, right? But you learn that stuff here. Short, concise, evocative. Package name should be one word. And then case, whether something's uppercase or lowercase, means something in Go. So if I had a variable that was, F name, that means slightly different than if it's capital F name. And that's basically how you use godoc.org, the documentation, and then also the language spec, and then also the other, thing from the Golang.org website called Effective Go. All right, so that's a little bit about printf versus print line and seeing the type of different variables using printf format printing.